Welcome to Real Estate Talk, part of the Realty Media Group. We also produce The Property Show, Real Estate Uncut and CoreLogic's auction updates. All available for catch-up anytime at realty.com.au. Before we get underway, thanks to BMT Tax Depreciation, Printforce and Propertyology for their support. Hello and welcome to this week's show. A little bit different this week because my special guest is going to be Simon Pressley from Propertyology. And Simon and I are going to talk about a number of varied topics, but very, very topical. The first one we'll tackle in just a few moments is where Simon actually drives the final nail into the inner city apartment coffin, and we've got some evidence to show you, of course. That's one of the features of every time we talk to Simon. He actually gives us some great evidence graphically. Then later in the show, how can you calculate? Simon will give us a formula as to how much you can calculate, or how easily you can calculate how much stock you need to have a comfortable retirement. Very, very topical. And then we'll round the show out today by looking at just how some of the COVID doomsayers got it so wrong. And boy, did they get it wrong. We've got the evidence for you as well. I'll be back in just a moment with Simon Pressley, and we'll kick the show off this week and the final nail in the inner city apartment coffin. Don't miss it. Back in a moment. Welcome back, and as I said in the opening, my guest this week in the show is Simon Pressley from Propertyology. G'day Simon, good to be talking to you again, mate.
Likewise, my friend.
You're in lockdown, are you working from home still?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yes, I've been here since, I guess all the country was told to lock down in the middle of March. And as things have unfolded, we've made this a permanent decision. The old working from home is the way of the future for us.
Wow, how good's that? Oh, well, that's fantastic. But just as a point of interest, have you found that you and the team are a little bit more productive working this way?
That was one of the considerations for making this a formal decision. When you have a coffee with your QIC and you ask him how's the first 2 months of working from home been for you, and this fellow was struggling with it initially, and his response was a massive big smile, and he said, Simon, my wife and I have calculated we have saved 12 and a half hours every week by not having to commute to work each day. 12 and a half hours. So we've added an extra day each week to his life.
And mate, and a dramatic improvement in lifestyle, I've got to say.
Yes, there was never a perfect solution for this decision. The biggest disadvantage, I think, is you lose that connectivity. Things like Zoom, like we're using now, is a means to an end, but you can't duplicate actually being, in the flesh, side by side in the office. But it's just something that we're going to have to work at. But the pros far outweigh the cons in our.
Yeah, I was watching an interesting article. I know we're way off topic here, but it's a very relevant point, where there's going to be a bit of a mix between work from home and occasionally getting into an office environment for that sharing of relationships. You may even find that, it could be Friday drinks or it could be a gathering in some way, but there's going to be a mix, I think, between working from home and getting together as a team.
Absolutely. It won't suit everybody, but for some, it will be a much better alternative. And one of the positives to come out of COVID, Kevin, is we've all been forced to try different things. And sometimes we try these different things and realise, no, I definitely don't like it. And sometimes being forced to try an alternative, we actually stumble across something that we feel is better for us.
Okay, well, mate, let's get to our first topic for this week, and that is the final nail in the inner city apartment coffin. Just tell me when you want me to bring that first graphic up.
Oh, let's bring it up straight away, if you wouldn't mind there, Kevin. Yep. Look, what we've done here is to look at the graphical evidence of our 8 capital cities over the entire last decade. The blue column represents the total decade change in median house price for each of our capital cities. And then to the immediate right of each of those blue columns, we have hand-picked some individual suburbs within each of the chosen cities, and the green columns represent the total change in median apartment value over that same decade. So we quickly go through them. It's really not greatly relevant which city performed better than the other, because we're talking about the past. What I want people to really focus on here is the evidence showing an enormous differential between what the median house price of a city did and what the apartment value did in suburbs where high-rise density is most prominent. And it is an enormous gap. If you look at Sydney, Sydney's median house price increased by 100%, exactly 100% over the last decade. But suburbs such as Ryde only increased by 25% for an apartment value, Holroyd 40%, Rose Hill 46%. So these did not achieve even half the rate of growth as what the typical house did. Bearing in mind the median house price for the greater city, there will be plenty of suburbs that had a lot higher growth rate than what the median was. If we look at Melbourne, 91% increase for the median house price. Docklands, I remember about 15, 20 years ago when they were developing things and people said, wow, this is going to be gorgeous in the city, near the water. Median apartment values only increased by 11%. South Yarra and Richmond are very, very popular inner city places to live, but their apartment values have done bugger all relative to what the house price have done. You go through every single capital city there with the exception of one, and it really stands out. Hobart's median house price increased by 49%. Again, it's not greatly relevant which city performed the best because we could pick any block in time. We're focusing on the differential between how apartments in that city compared to the house price. Now, what's different about Hobart compared to the other locations? It does not allow, it's illegal to have high-rise apartment development. You can never get anything approved. But throughout our other capital cities, especially our two biggest cities, and even a couple of regional locations such as Wollongong, Newcastle and Gold Coast, where high-rise apartment living is quite common close to the centre, the apartment values just do not perform. This is the evidence of a decade.
Can I ask you a question? I want to go back to Melbourne now, and you mentioned their Docklands, and you know, you made a quite good point there about the comparison in growth and value. I wonder sometimes how much of it has to do with the quality of the construction and even the density. If you look at Docklands as an example, I mean, it's very, very dense. I don't know if you've stayed there, but I certainly have. I didn't enjoy the experience, I've got to say, even though its location was great. I don't know that the developers have actually used the best of the location.
Yeah, well, it's a great point. So what actually causes, we know the evidence now, so what actually causes such a big differential? And it's a couple of things. Firstly, they just build way too many of them. Now, there will always be people who want to buy an apartment or a house in all parts of the country. But that's not the point. The point is, what's the financial performance like, and why is this so poor compared to what else you could achieve with your money? They just build way too many of them. Now, whilst there'll be a buyer ready to purchase Docklands or anywhere, Kevin, the thing is, what are they prepared to pay for it? And there is so much evidence available for people today. You don't need a valuer to do this for you. You can simply just look online and see what else is listed for sale at the time you have some interest in buying something. Similarly, you can jump online and see something that sold last month. When you're talking high-rise apartments, there are literally hundreds of thousands of them. So you've got all this evidence in front of you, comparable sales, if you like. If you're looking at buying, say, a Dockland apartment, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, there will probably be as many as 100 of them for sale in either the same complex you're looking to buy in or the one across the road or around the corner. So you've got all this evidence as a buyer to say, I'm not paying that extra 50K, 100K. You don't have that big body of evidence when you're looking at an attached house. So mass-produced, too many of them, too much comparative data. Well, too much. It's a good thing for a buyer to not force the prices up. But when you then own that property, you are not going to get the growth that you'll get somewhere else.
That's right.
You mentioned quality of construction. That is another very important thing. Really, anything built in Australia, any high-rise apartment built in Australia in the last 20 years, if it hasn't already had significant structural defects exposed, I'd suggest it's probably only a matter of time before that does happen. And more buyers are aware of that now. So it's a shame for those who've already bought one of these apartments. But going forward, the buyers in future are going to be less inclined to buy one of these because they quite rightly are going to have a lack of confidence of them purchasing I call a piece of bubonic plague, these high-rise apartments.
And that's sort of, I don't know whether we should have had it up before now, but certainly the second graphic lists a number of reasons why that is the case. And you've just talked about a few of them there, Simon.
Yep, the final nail in the coffin. So we've already seen the evidence of the last 10 years. This is pre-COVID, right? Too many of them built, too much comparative data to stop prices going up, poor quality workmanship, poor quality control, and now we throw in an extra layer, what I call the COVID effect. There will be diminished demand. There'll be fewer buyers interested in apartments in future, partly because of how COVID has affected communities. There are going to be lots of service-based industries, people like you and I who wear, I used to wear a suit to work when I work in an office, who will have made a conscious decision to no longer work in an inner city office and now to work from home. When that happens, a lot of people who previously chose to live in an inner city apartment but are no longer working there, they are going to be less likely to want to live there. As more of the inner city residents move out to the burbs or to a regional location or something like that, demand for goods and services within the inner city, the retail, clothes stores and cafes and restaurants, the demand for their services diminish. So where their job once was, that will move to with it. So there's going to be a lot less people interested in living in these high-rise apartments in future. The final nail in the coffin for apartments, unfortunately.
Well, there you go. Really interesting conversation there. A lot to take away as well. We're going to come back after this very short break. And I'm going to ask Simon, and I know the answer to this question, you probably do too, but is there a formula? Is there a calculation that will help you determine how much property you need to retire comfortably? This is Real Estate Talk. I'm Kevin Turner. My special guest this week is Simon Pressley from Propertyology. We'll be back in just a moment.
Successful property investors know the value of leverage, but as many as 80% are willing to leave sometimes thousands of dollars of unclaimed benefits on the table every year by overlooking depreciation. Depreciation is the wear and tear of a building and its plant and equipment. The ATO allows the owners of any income-producing property to claim depreciation as a deduction, meaning you will pay less tax. BMT's fee is 100% tax deductible. Call BMT Tax Depreciation on 1300 728 726 now for a free assessment of your likely deductions. That's 1300 728 726 or use the link at Real Estate Talk.
Welcome back to the show. My special guest this week, Simon Pressley from Propertyology. The question I want to ask you, Simon, is there a formula? Is there a way to work out how much property we need to be able to retire comfortably?
There is. It's what I call a back of the beer coaster formula. It's what us financial gurus refer to as the 5% formula. Firstly, the individual needs to have a household discussion and describe the lifestyle that they would ideally like to live when they retire, and calculate all that as an annual income that they would need to support that lifestyle. If for argument's sake, if that lifestyle required $100,000 in today's money, the 5% rule means that you need $2 million net investments to generate that $100,000 income per year. So we just take $2 million net, multiply that by 5%, and that's how we get our 100K per annum. That is a net investment amount. So for a property investor, typically we've got property assets as well as property liabilities, our loans. So we need to subtract whatever the cumulative value of our liabilities are from the cumulative value of our investment properties to come up with, in this case, $2 million. And this is investment. So our family home, our debt-free family home, is over and above what our investments are, because even if our family home is debt-free, it doesn't generate a dollar of income in retirement. In fact, it would probably take $15,000 a year out of our pocket just to cover things like council rates, insurance, and some basic repairs and maintenance. So needless to say, not a lot of people retire with $2 million net investments, Kevin.
No, I'd say that's pretty much the case, mate. I'm just wondering about COVID. Have we learnt any lessons from that?
Well, I would like to think we have. A lot of people, their retirement strategy, they really don't have one. They go to work, they earn whatever they earn in whatever occupation they choose, and then it's the accumulation of superannuation over the years, which is some money that the employer has to put aside, and they just hope that that's going to be enough. Well, it's never going to be enough unless you want to retire on baked beans. An age pension, the federal government mandate for a household couple, that's $30,000 per year. I don't know that you're going to get too much comfort from that. So, and what we know is that COVID really smashed share markets, haven't they? Globally, they've really been smashed from this. I know they bounced back a bit, but they're still a long way down from where they were back in March before the germ hit our shores. So I hope that this is a wake-up call for the Gen X's and Gen Y's. There's really no time left in the working life of the baby boomers if they're relying on their superannuation, which is largely the share market. There's really no time for them to recover. But I hope it would teach Gen X and Gen Y to become proactive. You really should be putting aside, I would just suggest a minimum of 10% of whatever you earn, whatever income you earn each year. You need to set that aside and use that wisely for your future. That's over and above whatever superannuation money you accumulate.
Is that the basic principle you think that that everyone should follow, Simon?
Well, that's, I guess, some basic financial discipline. Now, in terms of some investment principles, property investors are very, very poor at following basic investment principles. I'd encourage all investors to think more, before you make all these really important decisions for your future, think about what a share investor might do. We've all heard that saying, never have all your eggs in the one basket. Something can come from left field and knock a big slice off the value of your investments if you put it all in the one basket. Share investors, for example, would not have all their shares in one company on the stock exchange. They'll have it in multiple companies on the stock exchange, and they will put it in different industry sectors as well as different companies. As a property investor myself, I have the same principles. The last place that I'll initially consider investing is the city that I live in. If I own a family home in a city, I've already got a lot of my capital tied up in that city. If something comes from left field and affects the property market of that city, and I've also got all my investment properties here, I've effectively put all my eggs in that one basket. So the comparable, what a property investor can do to sort of mirror what an astute share investor does, is to deliberately be picking locations with a critical eye all over Australia, all the other capital cities, all the regional parts of Australia, handpick individual cities in a similar way to what a share investor will pick individual companies on the stock exchange. Another part of making it sustainable, small fish are sweeter. If we can bring up a graphic here, I'll illustrate what I'm talking about. Let's imagine we had access to $200,000 to invest. Now, for some people, that might be releasing some equity in their family home, accessing the $200,000 that way. For someone else, they might have been really diligent savers over the years, or got an inheritance, or a gift from parents, or whatever. But what a typical investor, let's say they live in Sydney, with that $200,000, they would buy a middle ring standard house in somewhere like Parramatta, and it would cost about $1 million, and their $200,000 is their 20% deposit. For that same $200,000, you can spread that over 3 completely different properties. So we're doing what the share investor does. We're not putting all our eggs in the one basket. We break that $200,000 up into 3 smaller deposits on 3 different valued properties in 3 completely different parts of the country. This graphic is actually what I personally did about 5 years ago. I bought a property in Cairns, I bought a property in Dubbo, I bought a property in Hobart. 3 different states, some capital cities, some regional cities, different economic drivers in each of those locations. They've all grown in value since then. Some have performed exceptionally well. Hobart's performed exceptionally well. Dubbo's had a similar rate of growth as what Brisbane has, and so have Cairns. My cash flow is completely different. These properties are cash flow neutral. We're still talking about cumulatively a 20% deposit. That one expensive property in Sydney has a cash flow shortfall of $20,000. And then when something comes from left field and adversely affects that all the eggs in the one basket location, which has happened in Sydney over the last 5 years, all of my capital is exposed to whatever that event was. Something could happen in one of the 3 other locations, but for it to affect all 3, given their completely different locations, you really would have been very unlucky for that to occur.
It's very interesting, isn't it? The volatility of that Sydney market, and just, while there may be some tremendous gains in the good times, there are some and I've got friends who, had substantial property holdings in Sydney, and, it's taken them decades to recover from that. And that was just one downturn. So, yeah, you're right. When you've got all your eggs in the one basket, it's very, very dangerous. Simon, thank you very much for that. Always very interesting. We're going to come back after this short break. Simon will stay with me, Simon Pressley from Propertyology, and we're going to have a look at just how wrong the COVID doomsayers got it, how badly wrong they got it. We'll give you the evidence. Back in just a moment.
With the evolution of social media, marketing of property is no longer linear. Consumers are influenced differently. The Property Show is unique in that it empowers agents to connect with buyers and sellers through personalised content, social media and artificial intelligence. The Property Show delivers personalised, laser-focused marketing by combining new media, social media and audience targeting, and gives the agent a digital voice. See how well the Property Show works, and then let's get started telling the world about your property. See it now exclusively at realty.com.au.
Welcome back to the show. My guest this week is Simon Pressley from Propertyology. Simon, the question I've got for you is COVID, all the doomsayers. They came out with all those predictions. Did they get it right or did they get it wrong?
Got it grossly wrong, in my opinion. They always were going to get it wrong. We felt confident about. Not that anyone's got a crystal ball, but and I know I'm not for 1 minute saying COVID's gone. But the biggest, I guess, the period that I felt were going to have the biggest impact, I'd like to think that is largely behind us. And you can see again, just looking in this graphic here, what our 8 capital cities have done. We said before COVID arrived, Kevin, that the fundamentals, when we're looking at just a capital city perspective, Sydney and Melbourne, we felt had the weakest fundamentals of our 8 capital cities pre-COVID. And given that COVID really is a greater potential to spread, the more congested a location is, the risk to Sydney and Melbourne is obviously, to their markets, is greater from the onset of COVID. But they haven't crashed, have they? The headlines were really some really scary stuff. Melbourne, has declined by about 4% over the last 4 months. Sydney by about 2%. Perth by about 2%. Canberra's been the best performed capital city market so far. Hobart's had a little bit of growth in the last quarter, and the others, the median house price is the same today as what it was when COVID hit our shores. If we extended that and went right around the country and included some regions, large parts of Australia are on track for the 2020 calendar year to get somewhere between 4 and 8% growth. I don't think anyone would knock that back if you're ever given a guarantee about how much capital growth you could get in the calendar year. And large parts of Australia, I think, are on track for that at the minute.
Playing devil's advocate for a moment with you, if I could, is it too early to call it? Is it too early to say that the predicted drops won't happen when all the relief packages end in the months to come, Simon?
Is it too early to call? We've seen, I guess if there's anything that's unpredictable in the world, it's definitely COVID, isn't it? So until such time as someone actually can say, we've got a vaccine, we don't have one, and that's the fact. And for as long as planet Earth doesn't have a vaccine for COVID, there's always going to be lots of uncertainty and lots of restrictions. But that said, I think in time, society, like everything else that can happen in our lives, we'll find a way to adapt and work with it if we don't get a vaccine. So certainly that could happen, but what we're talking about is shelter. It's an essential commodity, and this is one area where the doomsayers get it grossly wrong, not just with COVID, Kevin. Every time there's potential for a downturn, you go right back through history, and the doomsayers, which are predominantly the economists of the world, they always have the forecast of the single biggest downturn over and above anybody else. And why that is, I think they're too used to shares. Shares are a very volatile asset class, and they do respond to sentiment within an hour. Shelter doesn't do that. We all want shelter, but it's not just as simple as what these guys do. It's like they throw a number, an unemployment rate or a population growth figure or a immigration figure into a computer, and out it spits a number. A human actually has to go through a long, detailed decision-making process to decide in a downturn, whether they hold that property or whether they sell it. And if they're going to sell it, they're still going to live somewhere. So they're not going to elect to throw themselves into a homeless situation. And so I think the doomsayers, they think property is an index. It's not an index. It never has been. And they treat Australia as if it's one property market, which it never has been. So too early to call, to a degree. But I'm still not in the camp that any market in Australia has this potential for 40% declines and all that sort of stuff.
Well, if you're wondering just how wrong they did get it, let's bring up the next graphic, which I think does actually explain it. And there's no wonder when you look at some of these headlines, Simon, how we can go into almost like a panic, thinking, I think some of the predictions were that we can see on the screen there now, anything up to 30% decline. They're big numbers.
Yeah, they are big numbers, and they are from all different sources. And if I put them all together in one graphic, the text would be too small for people to read it. But I've collected a folder of what all these acclaimed experts have said, and they're just the grabs from the first month of lockdown, middle of March to middle of April there, and there's some astronomical figures. The fiscal cliff has been the absolutely good for nothing term that's been thrown out a lot since then. There is no cliff. There will be no cliff. There are some support packages which is behind, I guess, the predictions that some of these people have about a cliff, because when any responsible party, state government, federal government, bank, whoever it is, when they release a policy, it's irresponsible to not put a deadline on it. Otherwise, the broader public will assume it's going to last forever. And these support packages, whether it's JobKeeper or deferring a loan payment or whatever, is intended to help, not to hurt. But of course, they had to do their best guess and put an expiry date on it. And back when COVID hit Australia, the best guess coming from ScoMo was somewhere August, September, right? And he's got no more of a crystal ball than anyone else, but that's where it come from. So policies were set by that date. As time's gone on and it become obvious that the virus wouldn't be gone by September, guess what? Those people who want to support us have continued to support us. They've extended the support. Some people who who were stood down from their job, many of them have restarted their job. Some people who initially put a hold on their loan repayments have restarted paying their loan repayments. No one benefits, whether it's a state government, a federal government, or our banks. No one benefits by pulling support out from society, because it will force us into the biggest, not just a recession, biggest depression we've ever had that could last generations. They don't need to do that. They've got the capacity to not have to do that. They won't do that. And that's why the fiscal cliff term might sell a few newspapers, Kevin. It doesn't actually help anybody. It's a useless term. No.
It's interesting. I think a lot of it comes down to consumer confidence, also business confidence. There was a survey that I heard came out this week from a very reputable source. I can't recall who it was. And they did a survey amongst business leaders who found that on a worldwide scale, they were reasonably confident that the economy would be okay. If they brought it back to a countrywide, as in, the Australia influence, they were fairly comfortable, even more so that things are going to be okay. But if you look at it on a local scene, they were very confident that their business would be okay and that the economy would be okay. It almost talks to what has happened with COVID, and that is that we've become very focused on self and what we can achieve to come through this.
Yeah, and again, we should never underestimate what property is. It is shelter. It's the last thing anyone who owns a home, whether the mortgage is fully paid off or you're still paying it off, I'd suggest that it's the very last thing that you will give up, because where are you going to go when you give it up? There will be some people, if COVID adversely affects an individual's income a lot more than others, they might not be able to afford that home. If you're living in a luxury house somewhere, or you've got, for whatever reason, you've got a mortgage of $800K or $1 million or whatever, if your personal income has been affected badly enough for long enough, clearly you won't be able to afford that. So you will probably sell that property, but you'll be replacing it with another property. The supply side of things was grossly underestimated by these COVID doomsayers. We said on this very show, Kevin, when COVID hit our shores, that Australia has an official undersupply of housing. Since then, we've produced official vacancy rate numbers right throughout the entire country. 75% of Australia is officially in a rental undersupply right now. Property is shelter. What COVID will do, the longer it hangs around, is that it might transfer demand from for housing from some parts of the country to others. But overall, COVID doesn't dump extra dwellings on our shores. So the undersupply we started COVID with is still here, and the impact that COVID might have in our construction sector, I'd suggest, will prolong the undersupply of housing broadly in Australia for some time. And that's why you'll see some parts of Australia, property prices will still grow because their volumes of supply might have been already a lot tighter than somewhere else, and they might actually be beneficiaries of attracting extra demand for accommodation from someone being forced or voluntarily selling up from where they were in a high density part of the country, for example, where there's greater risk of disruption, to a less dense part of the country where they can be more confident of their income not being affected by a future lockdown or something like that.
Well, no doubt a lot of robust suggestions and thoughts about what might happen in the future. What's your view, just in summary, mate, about where we're headed, and how confident are you feeling?
Yeah, I certainly. I'll deliberately reiterate. Property cliff, fiscal cliff. I'm not in that camp at all, and happy to be proven wrong in however many months or years down the track. Replay the tape. There are, contrary to what some people believe, large parts of Australia property prices are growing right now. I can say that for fact because our buyers agents are active in locations all around the country, and it's not uncommon for us to miss out on buying a property. And certainly a property that we are successful in purchasing, we're paying more for it today than what we would have paid for it, say, for example, in March or April. Rents are growing. They aren't growing in Sydney and Melbourne. We know that. But that's, last time I checked, they're two cities. It's not a country. Large parts of Australia, rents are growing, property prices are growing. Local economies are different from one city to the next. Some industries have been really hardly hit by this. Other industries are actually benefiting from it, and demand for their goods and services growing, and they're putting jobs on. So, it's inappropriate, and these doomsayers do it all day, every day, Kevin. They imply that Australia was one property market. Hence the headlines in our earlier graphic: 30% decline in Australian property market. Which part of the bloody country are you talking about, you idiots? Very narrow-minded.
Very narrow-minded, and further evidence to that, members of our family have been purchasing a property in Brisbane just this week. They had to, the first property they found, they went into competition and they missed that one. The second one, they went to make an offer, and within a matter of hours there was another offer, so they're in competition. They actually got the second one. I got the news only today that they secured the second one, but both properties, they were in competition. So I've got to tell you, the market is still pretty hot.
Yeah, and that's it's really important we hear those stories, Kevin. Thank you for sharing it with us. They are widespread. Large parts of Australia, what you described there, real estate agents are experiencing every weekend. And again, it's further evidence of what we said when COVID first hit Australia. We have an undersupply of properties. What your family member has experienced is because there's not enough properties listed for sale. So the active buyers, whilst there are less buyers today than pre-COVID, relative to the number of properties they've got to choose from, because there's a shortage of properties for sale, even the smaller volume of buyers, that ratio is enough to create competition, which is why property prices have either held firm or indeed appreciated a little bit.
Simon, we're out of time for this show, but thank you so much for spending so much time with us this week. It's the first time we've ever devoted a full show to just one guest, but it's been well worth it, I can assure you. So Simon, wonderful background, wonderful knowledge that you bring to the show. So thank you for that. Simon Pressley, of course, is from Propertyology. So if you like what you hear, and why wouldn't you, make sure you reach out to Simon and his team, propertyology.com.au. Simon, thanks for your time, mate.
Always a pleasure, Kevin. Take care, mate.
And thanks to you for joining us once again. We'll be back again next week with another show. And don't forget, you can catch all of our shows. We stream them all live right across all the socials, but then they're available for catch-up anytime at realty.com.au. I'm Kevin Turner. I'll see you next week.
Real Estate Talk, part of the Realty Media Group. We also produce The Property Show, Real Estate Uncut and CoreLogic's auction update shows. All available for catch-up anytime at realty.com.au. Thanks to BMT Tax Depreciation, Printforce and Propertyology for their support. Watch out for us in your inbox next weekend or catch us anytime at realty.com.au.